So the Prime Minister's promised us a no-frills budget and no major tax changes on May the 18th. In his pre-budget speech, Chris Hipkins also said he has made the cost of living one of his top priorities. Meanwhile, over in the blue corner, National's promising to let landlords get rid of tenants without telling them why. Labor Minister Michael Wood and National MP Erica Stanford are with us this morning for our Friday political panel. Good morning.
Very good morning to you.
Good to see. Oh, you're ready to go this morning?
Well, I'm in the blue corner.
Yeah, OK. So we'll start with the tenants because we've had so much feedback on that this morning. Lots of people from landlords and tenants and both sort of fighting their own corners, I suppose. I'll just give you one little taste, a little flavour. Russell says the problem is that not just that landlords will kick you out without giving you a reason, but renters have to live with the fact that they can do it. That's incredibly stressful, knowing that that possibility even exists, that for no reason your home can be gone in 90 days. What do you think, Erica? Does that sound like a reasonable tenant?
Look, what we're talking about is just a return to what we had before. The government were warned when they made changes that this would increase people needing a home and it would also increase rents. Both of those things have come true. Rents are up $175 a week since I've gotten in. We've got 23,000 people on a housing wait list, 3,000 people waking up in a motel every single day. Now, all we're saying is we think that it's reasonable to bring the balance back, swing that pendulum back, to say to landlords, we want you to rent out your properties. We want you to take a risk on those people potentially you wouldn't have taken a risk on before because we know now they're not. And just swing that balance back. We think it's reasonable and fair to swing the balance back slightly in favour of landlords.
The other thing we've been hearing from people is that no landlord is going to get rid of a good tenant because it's their bread and butter. So why do we need this rule?
This is cold-hearted, it is unnecessary and it won't fix any of the issues that Erica's just talked about. You heard from the tenant before. We're not saying anything unreasonable here. Landlords have always got the ability to remove a tenant if there's a reason. We're simply saying provide a reason so that tenant can respond if there's a problem. And I think most Kiwis would think that's a fair and reasonable thing.
I think you're right, unless you look at the actual process that you have to go through to make that happen. We've had people say you have to provide like photographic evidence. You have to have 3 strikes within 90 days in order to make that happen. And so it becomes such a process that the neighbours are having to put up with often violent behaviour, intimidating behaviour from people. So are you sure it's working as you intend?
Well, none of that sort of behaviour is acceptable, and of course it hasn't just begun after this change was made. We have sometimes had those situations in the past. But we do think it's reasonable when you're potentially taking away something that is so important to a person and their family, their right to remain in their house, that there is some process, that person has a right to respond, and at the very basic level, they just know what the reason is. And sometimes that person might be able to say, actually, here's another explanation, here's what I'll do to fix that. We don't think that's unreasonable to have in the system, and for the National Party to say you don't even have to give a reason for kicking a family out of their home, we think is just is utterly unreasonable. And all of the issues that Erica's identified, all of the issues that Erica's identified, it won't fix either. The reason that we had a housing shortage is because enough houses weren't being built. There were 1,200 fewer public housing places at the end of National's term than the beginning of them. We've built 12,000 more. That's the way we fix the housing crisis, is building houses, not taking rights away from Kiwi tenants.
Erica, do you have that little faith in landlords that you think they would kick a lovely family out who's paying rent on time and not trashing the home?
Of course not. That's absolutely ridiculous. The issue that we've got is exactly what you were just talking about. It is really, really hard, almost impossible, to get rid of tenants who are not ideal, who are creating noise and having their neighbours suffer, who are creating damage. It is really, really difficult to get rid of them. And what you're doing is scaring landlords out of the market. That's what we've got to remember, that over 90%, I forget the figure, but over 90% of rental accommodation is provided by the private market. It's those Kiwi mum and dads who've got an investment property who are now terrified to rent out their property because you literally cannot get rid of people. And so the balance has swung too far that way. All we're saying is when you've got a bad tenant, you should be able to get rid of
Minister, what do you say to this sort of underlying message that National is sending to the electorate? That is, you guys have increased protections for renters, you've taken some rights away from landlords, and rents have gone up $175 a week. You know, you've got more restrictions in place. but it's not having a good effect for tenants.
Well, let's just be really clear about one thing. Nothing about how this goes either way means that there are more or fewer houses that are available in New Zealand. That's a fallacy that sits at the heart of National's argument. We just think a basic balance, this is such a basic thing. If I'm renting a house to you and I want to make you leave, I tell you what the reason is, and there's an ability to have a conversation around that. There is never any excuse for that sort of antisocial or violent behaviour.
But you have
that
to
has
prove
gone on
it.
previously.
You have to photograph me doing it 3 times in 90 days.
There has to be some reasonableness about this. Yes, there should be some evidence before you engage with the person and tell them they have to leave.
Right.
They should be able to respond, but at the end of that, you do have the ability to end someone's tenancy. Let's be clear about that.
Let's talk truancy. We've had new numbers out for term 4 of last year. So we had term 3, and I think those regularly not attending was at 46%?
It's about 49 something, and then now it's 51.
Right, okay. So we're doing slightly better, are we, Erica?
Well, it's remaining stubbornly low. I think that's the key. I think the really heartbreaking thing is when you look at the decile 1 kids, those kids, you know, who need education to change their lives, 30% of those kids are attending regularly. And when you think about Jacinda, when she came into power and she talked about equality and she talked about child poverty, these are the kids that needed Labor's help the most, and they are the ones who are being let down. And it's not getting any better. And 82 truancy officers across the whole country is not going to make a blind bit of difference to those kids.
To be fair, though, a lot of the announcements around truancy have not had the time to bed in yet.
6 years. They've had 6 years.
Well, no, I mean the ones announced late last year and this year.
Yeah. It's really important at the beginning to be clear about what these figures are, because I've had people reporting them back to me and saying, oh, only 50% of kids are in school in any one day. That is not what the measure is.
It's regularly.
What the measure is whether kids are in school for 90% or more of that term. It's moved up from about 40% in term 2 to 46% in term 3 and just over 50% in term 4. Now, in term 4, if your kid was absent for 4 days, they won't meet that threshold. So one of the things that is impacting here, it's not the only reason, is the ongoing impact of COVID. Any child who has to isolate because of COVID will fall short of that 90% attendance rate. So that's having an impact here as well. Pre-COVID, it was about 66%. So we are putting that work in to make sure there's more support for schools. But if we talk about those kids who are the most disadvantaged, and we do need to get in there, it's about the other stuff we're doing as well, getting free lunches into school, getting rid of school donations so there's not that barrier for families to send their kids to school. So there's a lot of work across the board to make sure that we're making further progress on this.
Erica, I can see you like clenching your hands.
Well, it's personal to me. I mean, I've got the education portfolio and I've spent a lot of time looking at this. Things are not getting better, and you cannot keep blaming COVID.
Well,
no other country in the world has got figures as bad as we do. And actually, I'll tell you what is the really, you know, and throw out a whole lot of statistics here to confuse people, but the thing that you need to look at is the unjustified absences. They are at an all-time high. That is not COVID. That is not kids being sick. That is unjustified absences are at an all-time high. Nothing this government has done in 6 years has made any difference. We're going backwards. And if half of our kids aren't attending school regularly, and I tell you what's really disappointing is those kids who are now completely unenrolled from school, again, is at an all-time high. And the government refuse to properly invest in people like Blue Light in South Auckland to go out there and get those kids back to school, because they signed the contract at the end of last year for the same amount of money. One truancy officer for 200 kids, and they've got no more money. I'm
happy to respond to that briefly, Ryan. The issue of unjustified absences is one that we need to deal with. It's something that's been increasing since about 2013, which was when National made major changes to the previous tenancy services. It's been getting worse since then. Those are the facts. We've put in measures as of last year to put more resourcing in here to get alongside schools, to deal with both the kids who are beginning to get onto that pathway with a moderate level of absences, but also to give more support to those who have got the chronic absences. So there is work to do here, we acknowledge that. We've been putting the resources in, but let's remember where this began. It was National's disastrous changes.
Okay, well, let's, very quickly, we've only got about a minute left, it was probably 30 seconds, but just take your hats off for a second. Is this actually a problem that you guys can even solve? Or do we just have parents who don't value education like perhaps we once did in this country? We
can absolutely solve this problem. Absolutely solve this problem. Yes, there is an element of that, but actually, I mean, we put out our Back to Basics policy a little while back because I've argued for a long time the reason that we've got kids disengaging is because they're not achieving. Half of our kids at the end of intermediate are not at curriculum, and you wonder why they disengage and don't turn up to school. Well, that's a massive part of the reason, and we've put out policy around fixing that.
Do you think there's something that's fundamentally changed in our families that we don't put as much emphasis on education as we once did?
It's something we've collectively got to take responsibility for. It's something parents do need to, communities, governments and schools. There's no doubt about that, and I agree with Erica. It's something that we can do as a country. I think there are definitely some households where that is true. We have got significant issues within those households that mean that the education of those children is not given the priority that it should do. But you can't just say that's an excuse. You've got to get in there and you've got to do the work. That's why, as I say, some of the things we're trying to do is to reduce some of those barriers. So if a kid can come to school and be properly fed, that is much more likely that family's going to send that kid to school and that kid's going to feel good about being there.
Well, I sincerely hope that we can do something about it, because it's the future that we're talking about, right? Thank you so much for coming in this morning. As always, Labour Minister Michael Wood, National MP Erica Stanford. It is 17 after 7.